right, in this problem, we're going to be populating the elements of a grid with randomly generated values. There are some features of these values that need to be met. So let's go ahead and dive into the pseudocode. So we have a jumping off point. All right, so in this method, we want to be iterating over a grid, and a grid is a nested array. So you can kind of think of it as like a matrix where we've got rows and we've got columns. So first we want to do is loop over the outer array. So what do I mean by looping over the outer array? So remember that a matrix is made up of nested arrays. What do I mean by that? So when you're indexing a matrix, that first number refers to the index of the row. If I put a 0 there, what that means is give me the first row in the matrix. The second number refers to the column, or in our case, since each row is an array, we can kind of just think of it as the index of that array. So if I put a 0 there as well, what I'm asking for is the value at the top left corner of the matrix. If I change that number to a 1, I'm asking for the number to the right of that, to a 2, the right of that number, and so on and so forth. Similarly, if I change that first number to a 1, I'm asking for the leftmost value in the second row of the matrix. In this situation, we're looping over that outer array, which is which row we're currently looking at. We also want to be looping over the inner array, which is which column or which index within that array that we're looking at, within the row that we're looking at. We need to find a randomly generated value that matches the criteria. So randomly generate a value that matches the criteria. A, it's between 1 and max, inclusive. B, divisible by 10. And then C, not divisible by 100. So I'm envisioning we're probably going to have some sort of loop here to keep generating numbers until we find one that matches the criteria. All right, and then once we've generated this value and it matches all of this criteria, what we want to do is we want to set the value at that index to the randomly generated value. We've got the pseudocode done. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So looping over the outer array, this is going to be done in a for loop. So we're doing int I equals 0, I is less than grid.length, I plus plus. So what we're saying here is, if we're thinking of our matrix as having columns and rows, grid.length is going to be how many rows it has. So we're going down the column. How tall is our grid? Awesome. Then remember, we need to have another for loop for iterating through the row itself. We can't use I again here. Typical convention, we just move on to the next letter in the alphabet, so J. J is less than. All right, here's where things get a little interesting. So we can't do grid.length here again, because what if this grid is higher than it is wide? Or if it's shorter than it is wide? We can't use grid.length. So what we actually want to do here is find the length of the first row, because we can assume that all the rows will have the same length. And you'll notice here I actually made the mistake myself, but you want to make sure that you're not incrementing I in this inner for loop. You want to be doing J++, not I++. If you increment I++ in this inner for loop as well, you're going to be doing something a little bit crazy. All right, cool. So now we get to randomly generating a value. So this is where you take a look at your fancy dancy cheat sheet, see if there are any methods that maybe call out your name. I think Math.Random is a great candidate for this, but you'll notice that what it does is it returns a double between 0.0 and 1.0, where it's exclusive. It always make a number less than 1.0. So we're going to want to use that, but we're going to want to modify it a little bit. So I have this little playground where I'm just printing out the results of Math.Random, and you'll notice here it's always making a value between 0.0 and 1.0, but it'll never actually make it to 1.0. So let's compare what this is returning versus what we actually want. So it's doing 1.0 to 1 exclusive, but we want it to be 1 to max inclusive. So there are a couple of differences I'm noticing here. So the lower bound is 0 versus 1, and the upper bound is 1.0 versus max. So the first thing we're probably going to want to do is multiply this by max. So for this example, let's just say max is 10, just to make things a little bit simpler. So let's just say that it's 10. So the first thing that we're probably going to want to do is multiply it by 10. So what this is now going to give us is 0.0 to 10.0, still exclusive. So we're still not quite at what we want, but let's run it a couple times. Let's see. Yep, still not quite what we want. Let's cast these to an int, so that will get us one step closer. All right, so now we've got 0 to 10, also still exclusive. Try it a couple times. So, yep, we're making ints now. Hell yeah. All right, now there's just one more step that's taking us from here to here. And if you guess it's adding 1, you're exactly correct. So what this will do is it'll take our lower bound from 0 to 1. Great. And then we're now upping the upper bound to 11. But remember, since it's exclusive, we're never going to actually reach 11. So the numbers we expect to get here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So if we run this, we would hope to see just those numbers, and that's exactly true. And 1. Awesome. So let's go ahead and take this and add it to our code. So this is an int, remember, because our grade is made up of ints, or will be made up of ints once we've run the repopulate method. All right, so int random number equals this that we created. Awesome. Let's remove the 10 and add back in max, because max can be any number. That was just for the sake of example. All right, so it's between 1 and max inclusive. That's true. Is it divisible by 10? Well, I don't know. We'd have to check that. And is it not divisible by 100? We'd also have to check that. So instead of doing the if statement here, I suggest we do a while loop. The reason why is because we want to keep generating random numbers until we've created one that satisfies these last two criteria. So while random number, and how do we check if it's divisible by 10? Well, if mod 10 equals 0, and what do we want to do? So because I said we want to keep generating it until we've reached those criteria, we actually want to check for its opposite. So if the random number is not divisible by 10, we know that we have not found that number yet. We have not found a number that matches our criteria yet. If it's not divisible by 10, or if it is divisible by 100, that means that we haven't found a number that fits our criteria yet, and we have to regenerate the number. So either one of these things is true. That means we failed our criteria. We haven't matched it yet. So what that means is we can reset random number, and we can just, regenerate it using that same Math.Random statement we created. Running through this, for example, let's say the number we created was 200. It is divisible by 10. So this first statement is false. Then the second statement is true. So while we've satisfied the criteria B, we have not satisfied criteria C, right? 200 is divisible by 100. So what it's going to do is it's going to create a new random number. And then let's say, for example, we got 80 as our next random number. 80 mod 10 is 0. So this first statement is false. And then 80 mod 100 does not equal 0. 80 is not divisible by 100 evenly. So we would get false or false, and we would know that we don't need to generate a new number because we found one that matches the criteria B and C. So last step, maybe the most important step, is setting the value at that index to the randomly generated value. So how do we get the index of the row that we want to put this number in? Well, so the I is responsible for the pointer to which row we're currently looking at. The J, we want to look at which index within that row we're looking at. So that would be that inner array pointer, and set that equal to random number. And unfortunately, this isn't one of those problems where they give you input data in the problem and then expected output data. So we're just gonna have to run it in a playground. I created a new grid that is 5 by 6. I've set the max equal to 300. As I said before, this could be any number, just picking one so that the code will actually run. And then down here, I have this print matrix method that will print out the matrix so that it looks pretty. Cool, so let's go ahead and run it and let's see if we did it correctly. For every single element inside of our matrix, what should be true is the number is divisible by 10, but it is not divisible by 100. And it looks like those are all true. And also that it's between 1 and 300. And yeah, that looks good to me. Seems reasonable. Looks like we did it. If we go ahead and get rid of our pseudocode, here is what the repopulate method looks like.